Hi. For a person in love, the air looks no different for a person in grief. In this, my own lifetime, while reading, arguing, cherishing, washing, watching a video, sleeping, the numbers unseemingly rise. 305 parts per million, 317 parts per million, 390, 400. Shin of high granite ticks no less the compound fracture. I who wrote this, like the old painters signed this, J.H. Fecit, F-E-C-I-T. The name of the poem is Fecit. It's from Ledger by Jane Hirschfield. I read this at the beginning of the series here, one of the poems from her book. And this was a little poem that the third or fourth poem in the book. For a person in love, the air looks no different for a person in grief. And then she talks about the rising numbers of carbon dioxide on the planet here, and she's just making note of it. She's writing what's happening. And the name of the poem is called F-E-C-I-T, and that means, that was a term that painters used to use in the Middle Ages, that they would sign a painting. So she signed it J.H. Fecit, F-E-C-I-T, as in Jane Hirschfield, J.H. Fecit. So I opened up with a little bit of a different poem tonight. I've been sort of wanting to read the rest of the poems in that book, so I'm just going to continue in that vein for at least this show. My name's Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is Halloween, October 31st, 2020, 2 days before Election Day. I'm wearing my Halloween tie tonight. I dressed up a little bit. I have my, I'm wearing all purple, and there's my Edward Munch, The Scream, which is either for Halloween or for the upcoming election. I'm not sure which is looking worse. And the reason I wanted to do a show right away was I made a mistake last night. If you watched last night's show, I said when I gave my little rap about Trump's involvement, Donald Trump's involvement with the mob, I said that in 1980 to 1988 he was involved with the Russian mob. No, it was the Italian mob. From 1980 to 1988, the original investments in the Atlantic City casinos was with the Italian mob. It was Roy Cohn that introduced Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump's father had been doing business with the Gambino family in Queens. Trump always wanted to go into Manhattan, and the dad warned him. He said, "Don't go into Manhattan. I don't know the guys in there. I don't know the mob in Manhattan. So don't go there. They're going to eat you alive." Well, that's when Roy Cohn, the most heinous, worst lawyer in the history of America, the guy that put the Rosenbergs in the electric chair and was the main source for legal advice for Richard Nixon, and the mentor for Roger Stone. So Roy Cohn latches on to Donald Trump back around 1980, introduces him to the mob in Manhattan, the Gallo brothers mostly, and that's who funds him for the next 8 years. Well, they're laundering money that's coming from drugs and prostitution, etc., through some of the financial holdings that he has, most notably Soho, the Trump Soho, which is down in the Soho part of Manhattan, south of Houston, Soho. So Roy Cohn is his main man for these 8 years. Well, then Roy Cohn, a sort of closeted gay, hangs out with him at Studio 54 and all these clubs. Well, anyway, he's got AIDS, and he dies of AIDS. And Roy Cohn is the one who's memorialized in Angels in America at the end of that play, the end of the movie. That's who's lying in the bed, sort of crucified like Christ with his arms up. That's Roy Cohn. So when Roy Cohn dies, that's when the Italian mob stops doing business with Trump. And that's when Trump switches to the Russian mob, who he's introduced to by Felix Slater. Now, if you go Google Felix Slater, you'll get page after page after page. This guy was supposed to be in front of the Congress a number of times this year, never shows up. I've talked about him in the past. I'm not going to talk about him too much more now. That was enough. I just wanted to make the correction. It was the Italian mob from 80 to 88, and it was the Russian mob from 89 up till today. Okay? So that's what's going on there. I wanted to correct that. The New York Times, I wanted to talk about a little, I mentioned the New York Times last night, how it's anything but a lot of people want to, the New York Times, a big left-wing publication. What are you kidding me? It's so far, like I said the other day, it's so far in the middle of the road, you'd run over an armadillo if you didn't went to avoid the yellow lines. The headline I wanted to read you from the other day. Let me see if I have it. I think I might have punched it up. Let me see if I saved it. And it doesn't seem to be coming right up in my graphics here right away. Why, I don't know. All right, well, we'll let that go then. It's not working right now. The article here this is on page A19 of the front section of the paper. And the headline is False Claims of Planned Violence at Polling Places by Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Election officials said people were confronting them with false assertions that Antifa, the loose collection, what they're calling Antifa is a loose collection of left-wing activists, and Black Lives Matter protesters were coordinating riots at polling places across the country. Where'd they get this from? One of these rumors began this month when the Federalists, a conservative outlet, noticed that a liberal activist website called Shut Down DC said people should protest if Mr. Trump was reelected. Well, right off the bat, that's not exactly what happened. Right-wing commentators attached inflammatory captions to their posts sharing the Federalist article, which right off the bat wasn't right. Many said it was evidence of a planned far-left violence on Election Day, and without proof that Black Lives Matter was involved. So the false rumor was shared by 472 public Facebook posts, which then generated 96,000 likes. So almost 100,000 people looked at 500 people's posts on Facebook, and also quite a few times on Twitter. And Craig, a right-wing commentator and a Marine veteran, shared the rumor on Facebook, and he said that his post was not a call for violence, that the right-wing guy was not calling for violence. Well, let's look at exactly what happened here. What happened was, notice in back of me I have a Adbusters magazine here today, and we're going to try to get this. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, we got it now. All right, let's put it up. In back of you, what you're looking at right now is the actual page that was in Adbusters magazine back in the summer. And we'll put it up in the top here. We'll just put it up in the top here. And what this was they wanted to, starting in September 17th, Adbusters magazine, and this is that particular issue. I've held this up before. Adbusters is a very left-wing, very anti-capitalist magazine. It's a political economy magazine to the far left. And these are the people that brought us the Occupy Wall Street movement. Literally, these are the people that brought us the Occupy Wall Street movement. And what they're doing right now is, they said, let's once again summon that sweet non-violence that was our calling card in Zuccotti Park. They wanted to go for 50 days from September 17th to November 3rd. And what they wanted was hashtag White House Siege. And they were drawing wind from hashtag MeToo, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Extinction Rebellion. So they're talking about the women's movement, the Black Lives movement, the climate change movements. And they were basically calling on all these groups to come together and let's do what they did in Zuccotti Park back in 10, 12 years ago, and let's do it again. Let's have a sit-in, a non-violent, very clearly non-violent sit-in. So when I first read this, I said to myself, that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea. Their headline here was, "Never doubt that one perfectly timed ritual can change the course of history." It didn't sound like a smart thing to do to me. It sounded like Trump was already sort of riling up his right-wing group there, talking about the violence that was going to happen, by the people from Adbusters calling for a recreation of the Occupy movement. at Zuccotti Park, or excuse me, at the White House, and have a sit-in at the White House for 50 days. Well, it sounds sort of cute and everything, but in this current atmosphere, it just did not sound like a good idea to me. And I sort of had it in my mind. I said, maybe I should write them a letter and tell them don't do it. It's not a great idea. Not this time. It's not going to happen. Well, I sort of forgot the whole thing, and then I remembered it, and then I went back and I started to look and see what was happening around September 17th. And sure enough, it was a rainy day. The Federalists had put out their warning about it. And in view of the Federalists calling it a violent action, the group themselves started to back off. They recognized that there was going to be Proud Boy, militia, and Trump right-wing people coming out in response to them. So rather than give them the opportunity, they all backed off. And if you look at the tweets and the emails from that period of time that were connected with hashtag White House siege, you'll find out that the whole thing backed off. It never happened. They didn't get in the park. They didn't occupy anything. And it dissipated. It completely dissipated. But the point was the Federalists, and the reason I mentioned the Federalists is, again, on yesterday's show, I mentioned the Powell Memo again, and I'll show you that little thing that I did a while ago. Well, let's get rid of the Zuccotti Park there. I always forget to take these things down. I finally wrote it down. I wrote down when it happened. So the Powell Memo happens in 1971. And it's in reaction to the 60s. And I'll get into this a little bit more at another time, but I just wanted to actually put it on the board here rather than having this blank board. And in the Powell Memo, they talk about, they don't talk about Fox News, they talk about fair and balanced. But what they went after were the schools, the think tanks, and the businesses. Now, the Powell Memo itself is, so this was August 1971. And it's a confidential memo, and it's called Attack on the Free Enterprise. Whoops, let's get back to the middle. It's called an attack on the free enterprise system. So Powell, who becomes a Supreme Court justice, writes his letter to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, pretty much saying that American capitalism is under siege. And one of his main starting points is how Milton Friedman is this great defender of capitalism. Milton Friedman, give me a break. This is the guy who Forbes magazine called his trickle-down economics was called the worst idea ever. And I have that documentation here. We'll do that another time. And that Ralph Nader was the most dangerous man in America. What was happening was, all during the 60s, the intellectuals, the students, were not happy with this war going on. We're not happy with the racial injustice going on. We're not happy with the sexism going on. So they rose up against, we rose up against these things. We were in the streets. Now, I certainly wasn't anti-capitalist. I had an open mind. I've had an open mind my whole life to all of this. I've had a couple of businesses. I make money. I work. I'm not a member of any cells or anything like that. But Powell didn't like the fact that the liberal elite, as they considered all these people, the thinkers in the universities. Now, these was sort of driving a lot of what was happening in the street, the agitation. Because if you looked at it, and if you looked at the thinkers were pointing out the flaws in the system. Sure, there's a lot of flaws in capitalism. Tremendous amount of flaws in capitalism. They were pointing out the flaws in capitalism and how it was also affecting our foreign policy. So with that in mind, what Powell is doing, he's writing to the Chamber of Commerce. And he's also, in this whole memo, and we'll get into this in detail as I go along more, he's attacking businesses, he's attacking the schools, and he's calling for these new right-wing think tanks to get born. And the Federalist paper, the Federalists, are an outgrowth of the Powell Memo. The Federalists, who are now feeding us false information about a violent protest, which was never intended to be violent. So the Federalists is one of the groups involved there. But for me, the most obvious at the time were the schools. I was in graduate school. I was in the New School for Social Research, and I was doing political economy. Now, when you're doing political economy, you're reading, say, Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations. There aren't a lot of formulas in political economy. It's a branch of philosophy. It's thinking through, talking through, and it's creating a sort of a bed to put your thoughts into. It's not an econometric model. So we know that we talk about supply and demand, but we're not measuring supply and demand in political economy. So the political economists are the thinkers who are giving you the ideas for what you want to incorporate. The economist comes along after the political economy, and he starts to create formulas, and he starts to measure things. And I'll give you an example. You have a supply curve and you have a demand curve. Well, there's a certain amount of demand for a product. Well, as the supply for the product increases, and the same amount of people want it, the price is going to start to come down so they can all buy it. If the supply starts to decrease and that same amount of people buy it, then the price is going to increase. It's basic sort of laws of supply and demand. Now, that's sort of a mathematical model looking at it. Well, what's the effect of advertising on the demand? Where does that come into the picture? How does the advertising affect my demand? Well, if I'm sort of want to, buy a new car, and I need a new car, and I want to buy a new car, well, maybe I've got a certain amount of money in my budget, I'm going to spend so much money. But if I get inundated with advertising continuously, showing me the car that's twice as expensive, or 3 times as expensive, or my neighbors have it, or I should have this, you start to develop these other sort of emotional attachments to what you're doing. So when these emotional attachments start to come in, and they're there every second you're making any kind of financial decision, you can't predict what's going to happen based on these kinds of models. And that's pretty much what I learned about econometrics when I was in graduate school at the time. You would create these mammoth models where you might have 20 different formulas, or 30 formulas, or 40 formulas. They're going to tell you, well, if you do this, we're going to get this out at the other end. Well, it's not always the case, because things happen. Stuff happens. People make decisions. Somebody in the family dies. Somebody goes on a trip. God knows what can happen. You pick up the newspaper, and in the last 4 years, as you know, anything can happen at any time. So people's states get affected by these things. So you don't always react like you would econometrically. What the Powell Memo wanted to do, and they did it successfully, they wanted to get rid of the thinkers and replace them with widget counters, with econometric model people. The people that weren't the thinkers, but the people that were the go out and just make a formula kind of people, the non-thinkers. And they did this not only in political economy, but they did this in psychology, sociology. They did this in all your liberal arts in your graduate schools. They started in the graduate schools and they worked their way down. By the time you got to 1975, 1980, the thinkers were gone, and the widget counters were all in there, which led us to the 80s and the age of greed and everything. So the Powell Memo has a powerful, powerful, powerful influence on American life for the next 50 years. This was, let's go back to the board there for 1 second. This was 1971, the Powell Memo. Well, 80, 90, 2000, 2010, this is 2020, practically 2021. And we are living in a world that was, in a sense, created and formed by this major document, the Powell Memo. And as my yellow plasticized version of it, we'll get into it more. Like I said, it's one of the big hammers that I carry around with me all the time. It's really gets your agina going there when you realize how something like this has affected us to this day today. So I was talking about the New York Times. We started this with the New York Times. So here's the New York Times publishing this little piece about that the Federalists basically put out, which was incorrect to start with. Rachel Maddow, at the beginning of the year, January, the first week in January 10th, 2020, Rachel Maddow on her evening show that night, she says, I believe the New York Times is one of the great wonders of the world. We are a better country and a better world for having the New York Times in it. But the New York Times has something wrong with it when it comes to reporting about Hillary Clinton. Well, it's got something wrong with it with more than just reporting about Hillary Clinton, I'll tell you that. But this was what she said on national television that night. I believe the New York Times is one of the great wonders of the world. No doubt about it. I get this paper delivered to my house every day. I go through it every day. You can't get more for your money in terms of your art section, your science section, your food section, your news, your international, your business, sports, obituaries. It's a great source of news and information, and it goes out to everybody in the country. Not like Fox News, which is existing in a bubble. People don't question what Jon Stewart on his show used to question everything that happened on Fox News. Nobody really has done that to the extent that he was doing it night after night. John Oliver goes after them a lot, and a few other people do, and Samantha Bee does, but not like Jon Stewart did. The point is this. The New York Times goes out to everybody, as does the Washington Post, as does the Associated Press articles, and these things are shared by everybody. You can't lie to everybody all the time. So this isn't false news that's coming out. What's false is the fact that Trump doesn't like it because it's against him. Anything against him he considers false news. And that's where I was going with this whole thing, is that I'm an avid reader of the New York Times, and it's a good place to start, but it's not progressive. It's not left-leaning. It's not socialist. It's on any level at all. It's a middle-of-the-road paper that supports the establishment. Donald Trump is crushing the establishment. He's a gangster. He's a fascist. He's a gangster. First of all, he's a gangster. And he's using fascist policy. The guy has studied Mussolini and Hitler's speeches. He was an avid, one of the few things that it's like that he was an avid student of was studying authoritarian speeches. Everybody he's friendly with around the globe are authoritarians. He's blowing off our allies, and he's cozying up to these authoritarian leaders, and we're all sitting here acting like he's like this is normal. This is not normal, and it's so unnormal. We'll go one step further today, and we got a minute here. Let's see if I got it. There it is. I got it. Okay. Noam Chomsky, who is now 91 years old. The headline says, Noam Chomsky believes Trump is the worst criminal in human history. Holy Toledo. The worst criminal in human history? My God. Let me move. I wanted to move that over. What happened to it? I lost it, son of a gun. I don't know what's going on. I'm having a problem with my board here, and click it up here. It should move, and it's not moving. I don't know. Okay, well, let's just get rid of it. Got to get rid of it then, that's all. I was going to keep it up there, but it's not working. Noam Chomsky is 91 years old, and he's talking about the climate crisis and the global New Deal, and he's talking about Donald Trump. And literally, he says, in the 350 years of parliamentary democracies, there's been nothing like we're seeing now in Washington. 350 years. He's not talking back to Nixon. He's talking 350 years of parliamentary democracies. There's been nothing like what we're seeing in Washington. Trump, if he doesn't like the outcome of the election, he'll simply not leave office. He has said this, and he actually went to the extent of writing a letter, as an other officer, a Lieutenant Nagel, wrote an open letter to the General of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, reminding him of his constitutional duty to send American militia to remove the president from office if he doesn't return. Well, last night on Bill Maher's show, Bill Maher was questioning this exactly. Bill Maher has been one of the early people that was attuned to the fact that Trump was not going to just leave office, that he was not going to just accept this election the way it was, and he is rather concerned about this. And on his show last night, we got a pushback, and it was a reference to the fact that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been on board, and this he said he would, from what I understand from the show last night, that they would remove him from office. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are not necessarily on his side. He doesn't have the military in his pocket, and that they would remove him from office if he didn't go on his own. Okay, so that was most of the usual terrible news stories that we see for the day here, that are in the paper day after day. Let's see if we can find a nice one to end the day with. Now, yesterday I gave you this story about the nature show that was on television the other night, and here we are again. We've got another really terrific idea here. A giant pinnacle of ancient coral is discovered. Now, this is in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and I'm turning the page here. I'm going to put this up in the corner and come back to you right now. They discovered on the show on television, the nature show on television, they go to the Great Barrier Reef, and a lot of the Great Barrier Reef is turning into skeletons. And it's amazing. Some of these things on the planet are so big, it just blows your mind. They never knew this thing was there. They've just discovered a pinnacle of coral that is taller than the Empire State Building. Taller than the Empire State Building. This huge coral that's coming out on the backside of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. They had no idea it was there. And the thing is, it's rising more than almost 1,700 feet. And it's about 100 feet below the surface. And the reason it's still rising is it's able to grab the sunlight that's coming through the water to create a photosynthesis that's keeping the thing growing. So there's this, it was just a good news story that there was a little bit of life left in the Great Barrier Reef. So I try to do news stories in general. Most of them aren't very uplifting, and I'm trying to find a piece of good news here and there. So for the week, that was the good news for the week, that there is life in the Great Barrier Reef. Check out today's New York Times. If you're interested in the story about Noam Chomsky, that was a New Yorker article, which was, I found it on the internet, and it said it was from October 30th, and I had just gotten the New Yorker magazine came in, and it didn't have it in it, and it was dated 3 days earlier, so I'm not sure exactly where it's coming from, but if you go onto the internet, there it is. Noam Chomsky is alive and well, and still using his marvelous brain to analyze what he sees right in front of us. He's a critical, independent thinker, and in a sense, he isn't terribly partisan. He's not exactly, pro Obama on a lot of levels. He's criticized Obama. He's criticized all of them. And in this article, he even goes back to the Kennedy-Nixon election, pointing out that Nixon was a gentleman in not challenging Kennedy's win of the election, and it seems to be fairly well documented and known that the reason Kennedy won the election is because Dad fixed the election in Chicago. But Nixon realized that it wouldn't be to his advantage to attempt to challenge this and make a big stink out of it. So he sort of, like a gentleman, just sort of stepped back, something that a lot of other people haven't done. All right, so that's it for today. So happy Halloween, and I hope to maybe get to you before this election. And if not, I have a funny feeling we're going to be in for a rough ride for the next month or so. I don't think it's going to be over on Tuesday. Peace, patience, and we'll see you soon.